Welcome to this second session in Unit 500, Leading People. In this session, we're going to be exploring the different types of teams you may end up leading and how we go about leading those teams. And then we'll look at ways we can work with people to improve performance, such as coaching and motivation. I'll see you on the next slide. So, in that last session, we looked at leadership styles, we looked at some common theories and methodologies, and we looked at their impact, and we also looked at the impact of organisational culture around leadership and change, and we'll be looking more at organisational culture in detail in session 3. But if we move on to the next slide, we'll have a look at what we're looking at today. Right, so in this session, our aim is to understand how to lead different sorts of teams and to know how to improve performance in the workplace. So after this session, you'll be able to explain how to lead multiple teams, different types of teams. We'll look at those and look at the difference, the nuances, and then you'll be able to explain how to lead remote and virtual teams because there's a slightly different approach to those. You'll also be able to analyse a range of motivational techniques that can be used to improve performance. We'll go through some of those and also analyse coaching and mentoring approaches and how these can be used to improve performance. So we'll start off by looking at what sorts of teams there are on the next slide. So let's look at some different types of teams. As a leader, manager, you will manage teams, you will take responsibility for the team and for their main functions, but teams can come in many different forms. Some are permanent, some are temporary, some are part of the formal company structure, others are sort of additional on the side. One thing you can be sure is that across your career, and probably already, you will experience dealing with different types of teams, and how you deal with those different types of teams will impact on how effective you do your job and also how effectively the team works, so how productive they are. Let's look at some of the common types of teams in the workplace. On the screen now we have 5 common categories of teams: departmental, problem solving or project teams, virtual teams, cross-functional teams, and self-managing teams. There's some bullet points alongside each of those which just gives you a quick snapshot of what they are, but we're going to look at each of those in some detail in the next few slides. So the category of departmental teams would normally include anything you talk of your stereotypical teams. So it might be the admin team, the maintenance team, the quality team, and therefore the inputs and involvement are from all parts of the department. They're going to be working for lots of different departments. For example, the admin team are doing admin for different parts of the organisation, and in that process teamwork supports the overall objective because each member of the team is a cog in the wheel. It's a well-oiled team doing things that they've been doing for quite a long time and are very familiar with. Also, they'll need regular updates and information about all aspects of the team because they're busy and in a process. So it's just about keeping the flow of information going so they continue to work as an oiled team and they just continue working forward. So this is your stereotypical average team that you would expect to find a number of in most organisations. Right, so problem-solving teams, maybe called project-solving teams. As the bullet points indicated on the previous slide, they're usually temporary and focused on solving a specific issue. For example, it might be an issue around a process, an issue around a customer's order or product. I've been involved in quality teams when the team's been put together because some quality issues have come up and they need to get them solved and set something in place to make sure it's not happening again. For these teams to work effectively, there needs to be a clear plan and direction because as a temporary, in a short, specific period, they need to know exactly what they're doing. And as part of that, there needs to be a clear allocation of authority, how far they can go, what they can do, as they may be going across departments or across processes. And in line with that, they'll need to know what their success criteria is. What is it that's going to be classed as a successful outcome of the overall project? To achieve all that, they'll need to be fully resourced and they need to make sure the resources are there in line with the plan and direction. And once they're all set up and once it's going, they need to be pretty much focused and left alone to get on with it because they've been given their function, the authority and the delegation is in place, and therefore they're pretty self-resourcing. So virtual or remote teams, really we're talking about any team here that communicates more digitally rather than in person. So communication is key. It could be health and safety officers across a national organisation or a national safety committee where people don't actually meet up with each other, they just communicate digitally or link in on WebExes or so like that. So the sort of things that are important in these sort of situations are that they're managed by results, really, not activity, because if they're remote you can't really see the activity, you just see the results. You need to make sure that the communication is really good so that they stay connected, because obviously they're not seeing each other, so you need to emphasize that. There needs to be clear guidance on how to handle meetings and schedules, and we'll look at this category in a little bit more detail to us because it's probably one of the most difficult, and all that goes together to making sure that they've got good feedback and support, obviously because of the fact that they're remote, virtual, they're not actually seeing each other, they may not actually know a lot about each other, so it's key. So that's why we'll look at that one in a bit more detail later. So in cross-functional teams, we're talking about a team of permanent members collaborating perhaps from other different departments, a little bit like a project team really, to sort of bring together internal expertise. And they'll have a common goal, but one of the things we've got to be careful of is that they will also maybe have another leader, their departmental leader, and they may have their own individual goals, and we've got to recognise them as we're building things forward. We've got to think about where, because of that leader, we've got to think about where the basis of their authority or their priority might lie. It needs to be clear, as we said, because they may have another leader and we may need to liaise with them. And we need to remember that we're trying to ensure a culture of cooperation. We're pollinating ideas from the different departments and creating understanding, and that might go against the culture of the organisation. When we look at culture, we'll explain that more, but it might go against it because there might be a very departmental culture about protecting what you have and what you own, and that pollination might not come naturally. But we are bringing together expertise from those different teams, and we've got to recognise that and give them their credibility. And we've also got to recognise that we're building in redundancy so that other people start to know about what other parts of the organisation are. So again, they can be a little bit temperamental sometimes. They can have problems at the beginning, and we need to make sure we handle that with the right sort of leadership. So self-managing teams are the ones that have got the most empowerment, as they probably just basically, some people would say it's not really a team, it's just the team is just a wrapper for them to operate within, because it will be people with certain skill sets that have the power to make decisions, informed decisions, complete things to the end, and make sure that they deliver that service. So they're very much self-managed, and they take a feeling of ownership for the project. So the clear areas is micromanagement really won't work with them, because they're used to being self-managed, and they'll probably find it a hindrance. But they need to be given that responsibility so it's clear, but they still need the support and feedback to be there if they need it. And one thing that's clear is they need a clear reporting chain or process, as if they've been used to being self-managed or doing things on their own, they may not feel the need to report until the end. And if you want them to report more often than that, there needs to be a clear process in place so that they know when and how they report it. I don't know, weekly they give a report of where they're up to, etc., or something similar to that, but there needs to be something clearly laid out. So there's many aspects to leading teams, and we've looked at leadership styles, and we've discussed how you may well have to vary that dependent on the task, the situation, or the people involved. And you are the person, the leader, who will make that judgment. You'll base that on your knowledge of the task, the situation they're in at the time, and the individuals that you know you've got in your team. But there are some key areas to managing and leading remote or virtual teams that, if you want to do it effectively, and they're based around sort of expectations that will be there. There is a presumption from a lot of managers who manage remote workers that they will abuse the privilege. I mean, the privilege of not having to come into the office every day, and that otherwise productive team member you once know will turn into a television addict slacker who watches Jeremy Kyle all day and drinks coffee and just occasionally logs onto emails to make it look as if they are engaged. And there may be individuals out there like that. It is not suited to everyone working away from the workplace and not being involved, but it does become abundantly clear if a person's suited to it once you get the right arrangements there and you establish what those expectations are, and that there's clear points of where those expectations lie. So the first of those expectations is availability. We need to communicate clear boundaries or guidelines on when we expect people to be online. I don't mean literally online, I mean reachable by text, email, chat, or otherwise. And it's not necessarily going to be 9 to 5 with the sort of virtual remote workers, but we need to establish how they're going to communicate with the team and the team supervisor, leader, and in the same way you would in an office. It happens naturally in a face-to-face environment, but in the remote or virtual work teams, we need to clearly outline the expectation. The second one is productivity. There shouldn't be any difference between the productivity of an employee who comes into the office every day and that you see, or someone that you work with virtually or remotely. In fact, research has shown, and we'll talk about that more later, that sometimes it's higher for people who work remotely, say home working. But they can still be involved in shared objectives. We need to keep them involved, and as we said earlier, we need to manage them by objective, not by activity, because we're not going to see all the activity they're doing, and therefore we need to make sure we're managing by objective. And to do that, we need clear objectives, because we need to eliminate the micromanagement. We can't be on the phone to these people all the time saying, have you done this, have you done this, have you done this, because one, it's very hard for them, and secondly, it becomes very, very tiring as the leader as well to be doing that all the time. We need to ensure they have priorities and that they're given direction, and then it's up to them to do it. And if we've got the right people on board, it is likely that these team members will thrive in this environment. But it can be about educating yourself as much as them if you're not used to it. The third is about meeting attendance. As we have said, communication is vital in any team, but in remote working it is even more, and we'll talk about that more later. The people start to enjoy the benefits of working remotely, and they can become used to that freedom. Okay, they start setting their own timetable, but there needs to be clear expectation of when there will be meetings or what will need to be attended, because we do need regular get-togethers, and you still need people to, whether it be by web broadcasting over the internet, by Skype, or quarterly meetings coming together, there do need to be some face-to-face or some planned sessions that is, and we need to establish expectations of when and how, and that will be mandatory. The fourth is that we really need to embrace technology, and we need to make sure the people involved embrace technology, because technology is not like it used to be. The costs have come down, and the smart rooms, Skype, FaceTiming, all these options are available to us with instant messaging, and all of these can be great if used correctly. We've also got things like cloud storage, remote access to stuff. It can almost be as if someone is in a virtual office. Electronic diaries are great now because they can be shared as long as some sort of formatting is agreed, so that you can see what each other's doing, which is just replacing that point of seeing people in the office and thinking, oh, they're out the office, they're busy. You feel that you've got a connection with them, so they can be great. We also need to make sure we're using smart objectives or smart targets well, so that we're clearly telling people what we need and when we need it by, and we're making sure it's realistic and the resources are in place. So we need to make sure we're in that position. And finally, there needs to be a good support network, and we need to encourage that network, because it's not just about the leader communicating with each individual member of the team. The team, if they're remote or virtual, need to feel that they've got the network so they can just contact the other person informally as well as formally, to have chats, to talk about things, because it's not like just popping and seeing them in the office. It's a different environment, and therefore that support network needs to be established so that they know where they can share ideas, where they can talk to each other, and where they can keep in contact. Otherwise, it's going to be quite hard for those people to remain engaged. So when we're dealing with these remote or virtual teams and trying to meet these expectations, we need to exhibit particularly good traits, skills in certain areas. It's a bit like a cartoonist doing caricatures. They have to exaggerate certain things to get the message across. And because we're not seeing these people on a daily basis, we need to exaggerate these things. And the first of those is being approachable. It's even harder as a remote worker or virtual worker to approach or contact your supervisor or leader if you don't feel there's a real open relationship. If they're not approachable, it's not like being in the office where you see them every day and you can pick the moment with their mood or if they seem busy. It's really easy as a remote or virtual team member to hide away. So we need to exaggerate. You need to exaggerate your approachability. Communication, you need to be a good communicator. The Maharebin rule of the 7% of what we say, 38% of it being vocal, tone and pitch, and 55%, so that's a massive 55% being communicated via the non-verbal communication. Obviously, remotely or as a virtual team, we're not going to get that non-verbal communication across. Our mannerisms, our facial expressions, our body language. So we're relying on the 7%, the words we say, and then the 38% in our tone, our pitch, etc., and the way we're pacing it. So it's really, really important that we make sure we're good communicators. We're not going to be doing everything face to face, but it does reinforce why we do need those face to face opportunities in the meetings, etc. We need to be constructive. It's with that loss of non-verbal communication, we need to make sure we're really concentrating on being constructive, and that any criticism we use is concentrating on being constructively framed so that people feel positive and that they can take things forward. We need to be encouraging, and that links into the constructive criticism. Any negative areas, really, we could try and keep to the face-to-face situations where we'll have the full spectrum of our communication skills and be able to get the message across better. So trying to keep a positive, encouraging, constructive environment, and also we talked about having that support network from the other people can help to make sure that this is a successful environment for the team to flourish in. Right then, so another activity now to reflect on what we've been covering. So in the first part of this activity, which is available as the Word document, you need to identify the teams within your organisation. So looking at the type and the function, and if you lead them, what approach you lead. If you don't lead them, just say what you think would be appropriate. And then in part 2, it asks you to think about remote or virtual teams. If you've got any within your organisation, you can use them as your focal point. If not, think about areas within your organisation where it might work, where it might be viable, and why or why not you feel it would be useful.